and welcome to the channel. I had the weirdest flatmate in my first year at university. Despite being otherwise normal and even a bit shy, Eddie would become desperately obsessed with a sudden, overwhelming need to lock the door. It didn't matter which door it was. Wherever he was when the attack came, he would jump up. He would run to the nearest entrance and lock it. People who stood in his way would be shouted at. Anyone who tried to stop him would be attacked. He became a ranting, sweating madman, until his mysterious sense of vulnerability passed. But the moment it was gone, he would apologize profusely. He would shy away and scurry away in embarrassment. For this reason, it was hard to hate him, but it became a little easier to despise him. Every time I returned home to find myself locked out. Similarly, every time I went to a party, and he had one of his fits, I was inevitably losing potential romantic interests and friends because I was living with this Eddie guy. In the middle of the year, after the third almost girlfriend ghosted me because he scared the hell out of her, I applied for a dorm transfer and washed my hands of the poor guy. That was almost 7 years ago now. So when Eddie messaged me on social media and said he was in town and he'd run into some travel problems, I decided to give him another chance. I'd always felt kind of bad about how I was going to treat him in the end. So I drove half an hour to his broken down car and picked him up around 1 a.m. It was a normal Wednesday night 3 weeks ago. I remember pulling up to the edge of a high, cliffside road to see a thin silhouette waving at me. He was thinner than I remembered and a little more in shape. My headlights fully illuminated him. I saw his face glisten and I laughed. That was Eddie, all right. Sweat was his trademark. He picked up a duffel bag and ran to my passenger side, before fiddling with the door handle several times. "Don't pull it when I'm unlocking it," I told him. He waited a tick. I pushed the button, and he tried the handle at the same time. "Boop." "Wait," I said again. I hit the unlock as I did so. "Okay, now." He finally got the door open and climbed in with a nervous laugh. "Sorry, man." His long legs folded up a bit as he sat down, and I could see his bare ankles. "Thanks for picking me up." I shrugged. "No problem at all. Do you know what's wrong?" "Yeah, the deputy was having problems. I think the cold weather finally got to her." "Cool." I gave a slight cough to clear my throat, and we drove in awkward silence until he brought up a joke from the past. Just like that, we slipped into that first semester 7 years earlier, with all its new experiences, hilarious mishaps and precious surprises. By the time we reached my flat, I'd remembered the good things about him, and I was glad that I had decided to help him. On the way in, I pointed to the couch. "This is probably the best place in the flat. I'm trying to save money these days, so the place is pretty small." "Rent these days?" he asked before putting down his duffel bag, and carefully sat down on the couch to assess its softness. "It will be fine. I can't thank you enough. I'll be out of your hair in the morning, as soon as the garage is open." "No problem, Eddie. Actually, I go by Ed now." Good for him. He has definitely grown as a person. From the socially awkward outcast I remembered. I grinned. "No problem then, Ed." I went back to my room and went to bed without a worry. It seemed his problems had been solved by maturity, or medication, and who was I to judge someone for problems beyond their control? Control. That was in the past. Of course, I was completely wrong. Around 4 in the morning, I woke up and got up to get a glass of water. From the kitchen, I knew my own apartment, so my footsteps were pretty quiet. But Eddie was still sighing and moving around on the couch, as if something was troubling him. I stood by the fridge, glass in hand. He whimpered, struggled, and then jumped up, in a mad, terrified sprint. He ran to my front door and slammed the latch. He let out a deep breath of relief, and stood there with his head bowed, while I tried to think of the best way to let him know I was there. Well, when he was having a fit, there was no good way to do it. He convulsed mightily. He gasped for as much air as his lungs could hold, and then he turned around slowly. His face was hidden in the darkness. as the only light came from various red and green spots on the television and microwave, but I could tell he was sweating profusely. After a long moment, he managed to breathe again. Finally, he said, "Oh, hey, I didn't see you there." Yeah. I put my glass down on the bar. "You all right, mate?" He meant his laugh to sound nonchalant, but it just came out nervous and excited. Same old, same old. You know how it is." I walked around the bar and approached him. He took a few steps back and I touched the door. "This is a safe neighborhood. There's nothing to worry about." He nodded awkwardly. I'm sure I believed his reassurance. I moved my hand to the latch. I wanted to make sure it wouldn't get weird while I was asleep. When I went back to bed, suddenly he made a half-hearted jump towards me. "Reach out. Don't." At that moment, I started to remember. I remembered the times I'd seen him attack people. During an episode, "There's nothing out there." I grabbed the latch to turn it back towards me, but a very small shadow moved somewhere in my vision. What the hell? No, it couldn't be. I react quickly. I put my eye to the peephole. My brain made sense of the curved panorama, just in time to see a sliver of silhouette disappear along the pavements to the left. Eddie moved closer, bringing with him the smell of his panicked sweat. "Did you see anything?" "No," I lied. I kept staring through the peephole, watching the quiet night. In my otherwise unremarkable neighborhood, the asphalt shimmered darkly under the stars, while distant lampposts cast long shadows across the grass. "Remind me again, why do you suddenly want to lock the door?" Now that I wasn't actively trying to unlock it, he seemed a little less manic. "I never told you, because I thought you would start to hate me, but when I was 8 years old, I suddenly felt I should lock the door. I didn't, and..." He shivered. "A moment later, some men broke in and robbed us." I frowned at his shiny, shadowed face. "Jesus, was anyone hurt?" He nodded between audible gasps. "My mum." Another 3 breaths in the otherwise silent darkness. "She didn't make it." Damn. I didn't know what else to say. Just damn. No wonder. Before I could elaborate, the sound of something skittering outside reached us. He turned and listened in one quick movement, like a startled animal. And so did I. I was not too calm either, but I couldn't risk adding to his fear. "I wanted to sleep again sometime." He whispered. "Where was that?" It sounded like it was coming from behind. I whispered back, "I'm sure it's nothing. Let's go." I led the way and we crept through my flat. He was careful to mimic my footsteps, but he was still louder than me, and I almost jumped at every creak. As we entered my bedroom and reached a rear window, my nerves were raw. The window was fitted with stops that prevented from opening all the way. I usually left it open to let in the breeze. Even in winter, we sat in total darkness, in front of this thin rectangle of cool air, looking and listening, looking for any sign of what had made the noise. Have you ever really listened to the sounds of the city at night? What I had become accustomed to was silence, was anything but. Gentle winds stirred a rustling in the nearby bushes. A train sounded its horn in the unknown distance. A dog barked twice. For a moment, an ambulance siren crossed the horizon. Beneath it all, a steady, low, haunting wail echoed across the world from the nearby motorway. I'd always hated that sound, whenever I'd accidentally become aware of it, because I thought it sounded like 1,000 ghosts, screaming from far away. But I didn't want to tell Eddie. It was about this time that my gaze had landed on something between the trees. When I first saw the densely packed cluster of white dots, I had assumed they were reflections from somewhere. But now, as I watched them closely, I was almost certain that I was seeing them rotate upwards. It was as if someone was turning a wheel of light, with the narrow side facing us. From the size and distance, the wheel must have been 2 or 3 meters in diameter. I whispered, "What is that?" after finding it with the help of my index finger. Eddie's gaze deepened. I've never seen anything like it before. What could it be? I couldn't make sense of it. As I watched, it got a little dimmer and then a little brighter, just definitely casting light around it. I think I saw some leaves above it. Is it changing? Eddie grabbed my wrist as he stared at these strange swirling lights. Is it getting bigger? Couldn't be sure. But how could it be getting bigger unless? I jumped up. I put my fingers on either side of the window and brought them down quickly and quietly. And then I turned the latch and locked it before pulling the nearby cord and pulling down the blinds. Whatever it is, we're safe in here. We'll be fine. It's probably just some kids playing with some light toys or something. He sighed and opened his mouth to speak, but there was a visible change across the silhouetted contours of his head. A moment later, he jumped over and slammed my bedroom door shut. The bang echoed loudly in my ears. I demanded to know what he was doing. As he locked my door, Eddie turned around and turned his back to me. I could tell he was wild-eyed by the way he whispered, "Be quiet, it's in your flat." The adrenaline rush from the slammed door made me a little angrier. Made me a little angrier than I wanted to be. What's in my flat? His desperate whisper was almost a hiss. I don't know. I just know we have to keep that door locked. I was furious, but if I spoke, I would have said something I regretted. So we stood there in the dark for a few minutes. As those minutes passed, I began to calm down. And when I was in control again, I opened my mouth to say, "Hey, I'm sorry, The floor outside my bedroom door creaked. I froze. Eddie backed away from the door and stood next to me. It was nothing but a dark rectangle in front of us. But I stared at it, looking for any sign of movement or change. The crazy thing was, I had no idea what I was looking or listening for. What could possibly be out there? Not only had we left the front door locked, there had been no sound of entry, forced or otherwise. If someone or something was out there, how had they got in? A faint light began to move across the walls of my room, and I waited for the sound of a passing car. But none came. As we watched the door, brighter lights began to roll upwards around us. Again, it was as if someone was turning some sort of illuminated wheel. It didn't take us long to realize that whatever we'd seen in the distance outside was coming closer to my window. Beyond the blinds, something was coming closer, but neither of us dared look. Away from my bedroom door, even for a moment, and then I saw it, between moving lines of shadow and light. I could have sworn my doorkeeper had changed his angle. I stepped back. A glance at the blind showed a definite light, turning closer, as if they were right outside the window, and about to come up against it. I grabbed Eddie's shoulder. I pulled him into my tiny one-person bathroom. He closed and locked the door. The moment we were inside, my heart was pounding in my chest, to the point of actual pain. Groaning my whisper, I asked, "What the hell is happening?" He shook his head. "I have no idea." "Are you sure?" I asked him, squeezing his wrists. "It all started with the robbery and the attack on your mom." "On your mom, right?" "No," he whispered back. My bathroom door was flush to the outside carpet, but there were hints of rotating light underneath, as if this insane, impossible wheel had somehow entered my room without opening or breaking the window. None of it made sense. "It must be you somehow." "No, it has to be." I shook him violently. "Is your fear making it real? Is something after you? You don't understand." I didn't finish the story. It didn't start with that incident. I had the urge to lock doors for years before that. The first time I didn't. That's when they came. I didn't understand exactly what he meant. "The robbers?" He shook his head. "Oh God, they weren't robbers, were they?" He shook his head again. My voice fell through a razor's hiss. "What's out there, Eddie?" All he could say was, "They want in." Something in the way he said it, I finally understood. It wasn't the bathroom door, was it? I looked out through it. I was thinking of my bedroom door, and my flat door beyond. It's not about the literal entrance to the room you're in. The rotating light below began to intensify, as whatever was out there approached our hiding place. The grip of panic on my hands told me I was right. "Then why do you lock real doors, Eddie?" I shook him until he looked at me despite his fear. "Is it a metaphor? Does it make you feel better? Does it somehow shut them off? Why doesn't it work this time?" He started to cry. sending mixed drops of tears and sweat down my forearms. I couldn't take it anymore. I'm tired of the constant struggle. The high cliff edge where I had picked him up flashed through my mind clear as crystal, and the fear that, built up since the moment I saw him wake up, suddenly left me. He'd gone to that cliff for a reason, and he had probably changed his mind. As he stood there alone, in the dark, completely calm, I asked, "Your car didn't break down, did it?" He shook his head. "You sent a message to everyone, didn't you?" He nodded, and I was the only one who responded. He was rocking back and forth in front of me. I couldn't take it anymore. They want in. They're always out there. They want in. I keep locking them out, but they never stop. I'm tired of being scared every minute of every day. The air began to move under the door, as the lights outside reached their peak intensity. Whatever it was almost upon us. "There's nowhere to go, Eddie. Let's open the door. Maybe you're scared all the time. Scared because they want you to be like this. Let's face them. Let's be unafraid. And it might just work." He didn't react, but I pulled him to his feet. I had never wanted to do anything less in my entire life, but there was nowhere else to go. With a firm grip on his wrist, I reached out with my free hand, unlocked the door, and threw it open. I don't care if you believe me, that's not the point, but I'll tell you what I saw. The lights were eyes. They were bright, bright enough to hide the grotesque moving body underneath. I still can't understand how it turned like that. Serpentine curves connected things in shadow. Each blazing pinpoint swung up, flashing images of hate and fear and paranoia, and then moved on, moving on too fast to process. This was the thing. The images were lies. My girlfriend had cheated on me. My teachers at school thought I was a failure. My boss hated me, and only put up with me because he hadn't found a replacement yet. But each lie passed too quickly to pick out and resist. I knew they weren't true, but they just kept coming. In the heart of this creature, I felt a hunger for fear. I kicked away a wide, grasping mouth and dragged Eddie out with me. I managed to get a few meters past whatever the hell this thing was, turned towards us again. As I flung open the bedroom door, I'd been right about the door handle turning. I knew that much in an instant. The madly spinning shadows and light failed to illuminate the beast that lay behind the door. I knew immediately that the thing behind us was but a servant to this, for this was so much worse. The only thing I really registered was a melted face. Its misshapen gaze seized the beating heart muscles in my chest, filling me with absolute terror, as if it had the power to reach inside me and dig up all the blackness and animal fear from the corners of my human soul. I knew that these things didn't want in my apartment or my bedroom. It wasn't that simple. They wanted into our world, and Eddie was some kind of conjurer for this nightmarish seagull. He always had been. I had the vicious feeling that I had to kill him now, but maybe that urge came from the emotions these creatures gave off. When the muddy ghost with the melted face began a rising scream that threatened to deafen me, I did what I had to do. I took the heavy lamp from my bedside table and smashed my window clean through. A moment later I threw Eddie out, and then pulled my arm out of a burning of caustic acid to escape. All I could do was lie on the floor and scream, as Eddie did the rest, by dragging me away from the place. That was 3 weeks ago. The burn from the grasping hand of that mud creature refused to heal. The doctors in the emergency room couldn't make heads or tails of it. Something had burned the shape of a molten hand around my forearm and continued to burn. When they examined it, they could find no acid, no catalyst, and no heat. Finally, they had to release me. Of course, their lack of understanding didn't help with the huge medical bill. The next day, I said goodbye to Eddie. I told him to stay strong and not to be afraid. We had conquered the forces of hate and paranoia, personified, and escaped with our lives by charging through. Instead of hiding, he seemed unconvinced and kept saying we hadn't done anything. But I pulled him out, and that he didn't know if he could do it without me. But I have a life to live, I told him. I had to pay off the bill and find a new place to live. He understood, or at least he said he did. Today I saw Eddie again. He didn't know I was there, because it was just a chance meeting on a city street. He was in a bar watching television upstairs and drinking a beer. I stood outside and, watching him for a moment through the window, astonished at the change. He was sitting with new friends. He was right, confident and completely ignoring the door to the bar. Instead of looking nervously at the entrances now and often, it was such a positive change that I actually walked in with a smile on my face. But I stopped about 10 feet behind him, as over the din of the bar TV above me, I began to hear what he was saying. His words were floating in the air, with an almost palpable stench. Sludge dripped from the end of his sentences, burning the ears of those close to his group. His new friends happily and haughtily agreed. I responded noxiously in kind. An angry customer nudged me as he passed. "Ignore those idiots." I turned away with misty eyes and walked out into the cold night. I hadn't rescued Eddie at all. He hadn't found refuge by standing up to those creatures, but by going down a path I hadn't even considered. I looked through the window of the bar one last time, at the misshapen, who had burned me with his touch, grinned back from the shadowy corners behind the television. It had found the entrance to our well. It had longed for so long. I unlocked the door, but it was Eddie who had let it in.